tonight we have Jill Pelto as our featured speaker, and I'm so glad she agreed to do this. It's been a long time coming. I had trouble contacting her at first, but we reconnected, and she is tuning in from Washington State across the country. So I'm even more grateful that she's here with us tonight. And she got her Master's of Science degree from the University of Maine, and she studied an Antarctic ice sheet for that degree, which I think is super exciting. And she also works with kindergarten through 12th grade students across the country to create data art. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, Jill, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you everyone very much for coming tonight. I'm excited to share with you a little bit about what I do, and there'll be plenty of time also for discussion and questions and anything like that. But basically, I'm just going to be sharing what I do. Basically, I call myself a climate change artist. So combine my art and science skills, and the goal of that is just to help people learn about these topics in different ways. Just a moment. So an example of my paintings this is an example of one of my paintings in the background here. And so in this one, these are salmon, and underneath the salmon, that jagged line is a graph of their population change over time. And this was a specific group of salmon in Washington State, and showing its increases and its decreases over the years. And this was one of my very early data art paintings. I started creating this style of art and came up with this idea in 2015. And I've been making art with that kind of graph art style ever since. And so the goal with something like this is to help bring that graph to life by using my painting and having the visuals to help tell the story that's behind that. So I work full-time as of recently as an artist and a science communicator. The photo of me on the left is the studio space I had in Portland, Maine. So I lived in Maine for over 10 years, and I only just moved away a month ago because my longtime partner got a job here in Washington State. And so recently relocated and adjusting to that new environment. And then I also work as a science communicator. And by that, I just mean kind of what it sounds like, sharing stories and information about science topics, but that in ways that are supposed to reach broader audiences than sometimes the traditional means of communicating about science. And so my goal is to get people informed who by using my art. And the photo on the right is me working on the mountain glaciers in Washington State, which is work that I've been doing for 13 years. And so that is a part of my background as a scientist. So when I was at the University of Maine, I did a double major for my undergrad. So I did studied studio art and then earth and climate science. And then when I finished that, I really wanted to do a master's in climate science to really get that intensive experience of doing a research project kind of from the ground up and having to really become an expert in that topic. And during my time at the University of Maine for those degrees, I was able to do a lot of field work to places like New Zealand, the Falkland Islands, which are off the tip of South America. My master's research was in Antarctica, and then on the bottom right, my work in Washington State. And so it might not be clear from these photos, but basically what I'm doing in these places is essentially just studying the landscapes and trying to figure out how they change and why they change. And so that can be how they changed in the past, like with the photo in New Zealand where I'm standing, that used to be covered by ice, just like Maine once was. And then sometimes I'm studying what happens in the present, like in the bottom right in Washington. That's work that I still do, and we're studying how the glaciers are melting now with climate change. And so these are kind of places I've gotten to go to ask questions and try to find answers. And I think that while these things have all been really hard work, it's a really unique opportunity that I've gotten to do this type of research and see these types of places. And not a lot of people necessarily get to do that. And so it's the things that I've learned, things I've gotten to see that I'm trying to bring forward into my art. I thought I'd talk to you just a little bit about kind of my beginnings with this field. And so the photo of me on the left there is when I was in high school in my art classroom working on a painting. And then the photo of me on the right is also during that time period when I was 16 and I first got to go work on a glacier in Washington. And I grew up in Massachusetts, so I wasn't, I'd never seen that type of landscape before. But my dad is a glaciologist, which just means he studies glaciers around the world and how they change. And so I got to go help him and just kind of tag along and learn from him and help with the field work in any way that I could, starting at that time. And my interests after getting to do that kind of field work started to really combine with the art and my interest in nature and science. And I want to show one example of my high school art. And this is a series of 3. The image on the left, that girl was supposed to be me, and she's sitting in front of the snowy mountain. And I really love those landscapes. And so the kind of flowers in front of her are supposed to be kind of these like representations of like her love of that landscape. And the image in the middle, I've come back as an adult and the mountain has changed. The glaciers have gotten smaller and a little bit of that magic is lost. And then an image on the right, as you can probably guess, I've come back as an older woman and the glaciers have all but gone in the mountain and it's lost some of that magic. And so I wanted to show this not because it matters to me to show you my high school art, but because I think it's important to remember and understand how, at even young ages, we really think about and kind of feel these topics. And that's something that I experience when I go work with, even like elementary and middle school kids around climate change issues. And it's something that I was already feeling really deeply about needing to express, especially because there was no form of education around climate change whatsoever. And that's something that's still a problem. And I'm glad that the bill was passed in Maine to try to get that to start happening more. So the most significant opportunity I've had with my art has been to do a cover for Time magazine, and that was in July of 2020, so about 2 years ago. I'm just playing the animation they made that showed the graphs and then how my art kind of transformed the graphs to tell a story. And so I'll briefly talk you through this painting, and I have 5 different graphs in it, and all of them are basically about global scale climate change. So not just, focused on the United States or a specific region. And so starting from the bottom, that like dark blue area is a graph of sea level rise globally from 1880 to 2020. The light blue area above that is supposed to be ice. And so that's a graph of total land ice loss from 1960 to 2020. And by land ice, I mean the 2 ice sheets, which are Antarctica and Greenland, and then the ice that is on mountain glaciers around the world. The forest is a graph of increasing use of renewable energy around the world. The yellow is increasing global temperature. And then the gray at the top is showing our increasing use of fossil fuels from 1880 to present. And I do have that sharp, quick little decline in fossil fuel use. And that was to highlight how at the beginning of 2020, when the world, really shut down, there was a quick little impact in what we were like using for fossil fuels for a brief period of time, with plane and car travel really almost halting. And so I think what that shows is that if we were to act in really big ways, like countrywide, globally, that can really quickly make a big difference. And then this is a painting I did for the cover of a local journal in Maine called Wild Seed that, as their heading says is about returning native plants to the landscape. And so it was fun to get to do a specific painting for them. And I was trying to show how temperature change anywhere, but specifically in Maine, would affect what our ecosystem looks like, because plants will have to shift, their ranges. We might have less of certain plants, and then we might have, certain types of trees and flowers that are typically further south that we have come up. And that's something that is going to be interesting to observe. And so in this painting, the orange kind of whole area in the middle is showing 4 different scenarios for temperature rise through 2100. And so from lesser amounts of temperature rise to more extreme amounts, depending on the course of the world takes, depending on the action that we take as humans. And so above that orange area are plants that are really common right now in Maine. And then below the orange are some of those plants are still there, but now you have some types that we don't see as much that, potentially could start to come up further north. So I wanted to touch on why I am combining data and art, because I think it helps to kind of share what I'm trying to get out of that, and why I think that can be an effective way to communicate these topics to some people. So I first wanted to show you this graph just on its own. And this is data that I helped collect with the research that I do on the glaciers in Washington. And so just pay attention to the dark blue of the graph lines. And basically what it's showing on the y-axis, it says annual mass balance. And the mass balance of glaciers is just their health. And so when they're unhealthy, they're losing, snow and ice. When they're healthy, they're gaining it. And so the time frame is 1984 to 2014, so 30 years. And so you can see that line going sharply down, showing 30 years of the health of the glaciers going down as they lose more and more mass. And so this graph is, important. It really tells a strong story, although I think that it can be hard for people sometimes to look at that and see that kind of full story. I think that for a lot of people that I talk to who didn't have to do graphing or create graphs, look at graphs, et cetera, like in after maybe high school, it can be difficult for them to kind of read data, and they don't want to take the time to do so, and topics can seem kind of abstract, and all of that is fine, but there are really important stories behind any graph. And what I see when I look at a graph like that is the years of work that I've done in Washington State. I see this is me on one of the mountain glaciers that we work on in the North Cascades, and behind me is all the snow and ice covering the mountains, and so giving water, drinking water, water to the ecosystems. And so this is what I see behind that graph, but I'm aware that other people haven't gone to do those types of experiences and don't see that underlying story and reality that I do. And so with my art, I'm trying to bring that feeling forwards. And so this is a painting using that same graph of the glaciers getting smaller in Washington. And underneath the graph, I painted ice and have its beautiful colors and patterns. I have it changed from more blues to more grays, because as glaciers kind of retreat further up mountains, a lot of rocks and debris will start to melt out, and they'll look more kind of dirty. And so this is the very first data painting that I made when I came up with the idea. And that was because I got to do that work. I was so influenced and inspired by it, and seeing climate change firsthand in the way of the glaciers melting, seeing forest fires in Washington, which I have during field work every year now, seeing drought in the reservoirs looking low, all those things I really wanted to communicate with my art and bring some of that kind of emotion forward into the graph. So I think that both data and art really have a lot of overlap in the way that they take observations and creativity to tell a story about something. And so the data is really difficult to get, and it's crucial, but if it's not reaching certain audiences, then we need other ways to get those messages across. And so I'm hoping that my art can be that for, certain audiences, certain people who kind of respond well to that type of visual. So by combining data and art, I'm building creative connections and ways to see the world and trying to create stories about environmental topics that people can relate to in ways that maybe feel tangible to them, that they can kind of picture in their lives. And basically, it's important for me to bring the emotion into the science research. So I'm going to show a few different paintings that I've made about, a few other paintings I've made about Maine over the years. And so these are two different ones. I'll first talk about the painting on the left, which is called Gulf of Maine Temperature Variability. And I should have said previously, but this work, the work I'm showing you is primarily watercolor, and then I do some details with colored pencil and acrylic paint as well. And so this painting about the Gulf of Maine, the graph is the top surface of the ocean there, and it's showing temperature change in the Gulf of Maine over about 15 years. And so the story I wanted to tell is that the temperature is warming, but I think the more difficult thing for a lot of species is that it's really variable. So you have these really quick, you have this really sharp increases and decreases in temperature now that are difficult to adapt and adjust to. And so I have the fish in the painting are cod, and I have them kind of disappearing across the painting because they have been really overfished in the Gulf of Maine. And then I also have shrimp and lobster, and in the sand, I have soft shell clams. And so from the top surface with the fishing boat, and then kind of throughout the water column to the bottom, I'm trying to tell a story of all of these different complex elements of the ocean being affected by the temperature and chemistry changes in the Gulf of Maine. And then the painting on the right, I made just a couple of years ago, and or I think one was only, about a couple of years ago, and it is called Rising Mitigation. And the story in this painting is about both sea level rise, but also what we try to do to help mitigate that. And so the scene here is supposed to be a coastal marsh, and then you have a little beach house on the sand. And so I have two different types of graphs in this painting, and the blue line graph in the middle is showing sea level rise from 1880 and then to present. And present is where the line splits off into three pieces. And those three dashed lines are showing the three most likely scenarios for sea level rise through 2100. So kind of low, medium, and high estimates, and are basically correlated to, how fast we take action. And then in the background, that is a bar graph, and it's showing our increasing use of renewable energy in Maine since 1960. And so we've really started to use a lot more renewable energy. And so that's really promising. And there's a lot more I think we need to do at a larger scale, especially with wind and solar. We use very, very little of either of those. But I think it's really hopeful to show what kind of action so many people, individuals, communities, organizations are taking around climate change. Sorry, that was out of order. And then I wanted to show you one more painting about Maine, but first I wanted to touch on so the work that I do with K through 12 students. So basically, I kind of bring my style of art to classrooms and talk to students about climate change, and not only, climate change itself, but I also really try to talk to them about kind of action and hope and things that are positive that are happening around these topics. And so I really love getting to see the data art that students make, and it's a chance for them to choose a topic that really interests them, and then they have to find a graph about that topic, which they get help with, and then learn about that graph and the story it tells, and decide how they would visually communicate that story with art. So for example, I worked with this year and last year, the whole 7th grade in Yarmouth Middle School, north of Portland. And then I've worked with a lot of other schools within that region over the last like 3 or 4 years. And then I do the remote visits with that too, with this too, to other places in the country. These are some photos of a middle school that I worked with in Colorado this April, and I was able to go for a whole school week to kind of do the project intensively with them, which was really awesome. And then these students got to display their final artwork framed at a local space at the end of the week. And then I wanted to show a really quick, just a couple minute video of some of the middle school students in Yarmouth talking about doing the project, because I think it kind of comes from them better than I could say what it means to them from my perspective. So I just have to exit to play the video.
I find this project really exciting and engaging because it's a new, like I never.
Oh, sorry, that was my fault.
I find this project really exciting and engaging because it's a new, like I never really thought of doing artwork this way, like taking a problem and then taking a graph and then putting them together and getting this really cool, really interesting piece of artwork.
To not only learn about an issue in the world, but also get to express it through art. And it's really helped me get a better understanding of some of the topics and issues going on in the world.
To interact with a female scientist and artist who's been on the cover of Time magazine, because you're getting tips from an expert, someone who knows what she's doing, and it feels like she's actually listening to you and actually giving you feedback.
I really enjoy how she incorporates different graphs and science data into her art, because I think it's a really cool way of learning about serious topics.
You're taking a problem and taking a graph and then putting them together into something that people can really understand and people can really relate to. Like people could just look at a graph and be like, oh no, that's too complicated. I'm not looking at that. Or I'm not really gonna dig deep into that. And then they can look at your piece of artwork and be like, wow, that really explains it really well. And that really accentuates like all of the ups and downs.
This project has really given me a new perspective on global warming, because it was so interesting to see the graphs and like what they affected. For example, I did the rise of ocean waters, and it was cool to see how many things that affected. Well, not cool, kind of alarming to see how many things that affected. And for example, it like affects polar bears because obviously a lot of ice is melting, and it affects lots of marine life because they're like obviously in search of colder waters, and if the waters rise enough, they could affect the land masses a lot.
And I definitely, I definitely do it again. Like I try it in the future.
I loved this extra extension, and if I could do it over again, I would definitely choose this project again.
So that was just a few students at Yarmouth, because I did this as a pilot project with a small group of about 5 before we did it with the whole grade a couple years ago. And so it was awesome to get their feedback. And obviously, you know, it's not going to be like the project for every student, but it's awesome that for a lot of them, it is a good project. And I think that it helps that it's interdisciplinary, where they can come at it from different perspectives of being interested in the science or the math or the art or different aspects of it. So I really think that it's important with something so complicated as climate change to really make sure we're communicating about it in really diverse ways. And so whether that's having like a clear website about your research, having, you know, photographs and art. And then of course we need kind of science papers and the data that comes out of research. And so with my data art, it's trying to combine a few of these forms and just be another way to communicate this information. Because obviously people's interests and learning skills are so diverse. And so that needs to be reflected in what we put out around these topics. So I wanted to share with you a little bit more about my process in creating art, and in doing so, I'll show you the most recent paintings that I finished. And so I start with finding that topic for a graph. And so a lot of times it's going to be something that I've heard about from someone or learned about myself, and I'm just really interested in communicating because I think it's important. And so sometimes that's also been a collaboration where I'm trying to, or a commission where I'm choosing a topic with someone that I'm working with specifically. But once I have that topic, I can start to really research it, and I just try to learn about it on a, you know, more superficial level. So I can say like, okay, here's like the story here. This is what I need to know about it. I can contact people who are experts around that topic. And I'll try to find different types of graphs and data that represent it. And then once I have that topic and I have my graph, I'll start to do a lot of brainstorming and sketching, because the hardest part for me in the process is just coming up with the idea for the art. Like what is it going to look like? What's that way to share this topic? Because there's always so many different ways I could show it visually. And so that's the most difficult part for me usually. And then once I do come up with the idea, I'm able to create the painting. And so I'm going to share a painting that I made, and my general idea was I wanted something with salt marshes on the coast of Maine, and I wanted to kind of have a visual about sea level rise to do with that landscape, but also try to focus on what actions are being taken to help. And there are a lot of actions being taken, but it was hard for me to figure out how to show that visually and how to incorporate data around that. So I'll show you what I came up with. And so I have 3 different graphs in the paintings that I'm going to show you. And so the one of them is about sea level rise over time, like this graph here showing sea level from 1990 to present. And then I used a graph. I used the graph that is green here. And so it's basically, as it says above, the increased support of US adults basically voting for environmental protection. And so you can see that's gone up on that green line from about 40% to closer to 65% over a little over 10 years. And so just kind of showing that kind of positive change as we kind of slowly get there. And then this is a graph from data I had to find in a spreadsheet myself and graph. And it's basically the amount of wildlife refuge land that we're setting aside in Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And I just chose those 3 because those are the 3 that border the Gulf of Maine. And so you can see how we keep setting aside more and more land over time as habitat. So this was the sketch that I came up with that was starting to get close to my final idea. Before getting to the sketch, I actually do a ton of like very messy kind of stick figure for people and very simple thumbnail sketches, really small. And I'll do kind of as many as those as I need to, but I feel like it would be, 20, 50, something like that, because it's kind of like writing, where first when you start writing, it's kind of just like getting things out of your brain and down onto the page. And you don't necessarily come up with your best idea right away or how you want to say things. And it's the same for art. You kind of have to just keep trying and pushing. And sometimes it happens really quick and sometimes it doesn't. And so this scene is supposed to be a marsh, and right on the edge of the ocean, and there's supposed to be a forest, but I'll show you more of what that looks like in the pieces themselves. And one thing that I do as part of my process once I start getting close to creating it is I find a lot of images. So I actually do go take photos myself when I'm able. Like when I did the paintings I'm about to show you, I went and took photos and some different marshes on the coast of Maine. But then I'll also look up a bunch of photos online to help supplement that. And I'm just trying to find a ton because I don't want to copy, any photo at all. And so it's just to like help show me like, okay, what does this like, type of fish look like that I'm going to be painting, and how can I do my, version of it? And so I'll basically create a presentation on my computer that's just reference images, so I can keep like looking back to them as like my guide. And then my personal method, excuse me, with creating is to sketch everything out with pencil first. And that does depend on how detailed, but these paintings were very detailed, and so I wanted to sketch everything out, and then I don't erase that at all. I just can paint right on top of it, and you don't really see it. I also don't mind if you do see the pencil marks. So here's a bunch of fish and birds I was sketching, and these are the paintings at the beginning stage, and this was at my studio. And the green is all it's called like frog tape, but it's like a type of painter's tape. So I was securing my watercolor paper to these foam boards to keep them nice and flat and safe. And so I've started to add a little bit of paint, but it looks faint, but you can see all of like the pencil lines I've drawn over the entire piece. And then I start to fill in color. So on the bottom, that kind of greenish area is supposed to be the ocean. And so I've painted all around the fish to start. And then I started painting where the grass for the marsh is going to be. And so a lot of times with painting, you paint like a base layer, because rather than painting like individual strands of grass, you can kind of do like this wash over it all and help ground it as you continue to add on layers of paint. And here's some close-ups of painting around the fish. You can see it's not perfect, but it's easier for me to do that. And then I go in and do the fish, and I'm able to work on them with small detail brushes. This is me working in my studio space. You can see the paintings were pretty big, so I have it upside down because it was hard for me to reach like the top part of the painting. And so I just turned it around with the art desk that I had. And the paintings are each about, we're each 20 by 28 inches, so just under 2 by 3 feet. Continuing to fill in more of the grass now, which is probably the most time consuming part. And I was kind of learning my method for doing it as I went a bit. Filling in grass and trees, getting close to being done. And then I have a bunch of detailed shots of the finished work to show you. I always go get my art professionally photographed or scanned, because that's very difficult to do at really good quality yourself, especially to have it be the right coloring and lighting, and to have it look perfectly, kind of flat and uniform. And so these are a bunch of the fish. And for this project, I researched all the species to include. So what type of fish live more in the salt marshes, and what, bigger fish kind of come in from the open ocean part of the year. And then also the types of birds that live in these ecosystems. So it's a ton that I didn't include too, but I was just trying to include a good range of types of species in marshes along the Gulf of Maine. And then I'll talk about the figures that I have in the painting, which was something that I don't do very much. So it was a fun challenge. And I had some friends pose for me, which is something that a lot of artists do, I think, is like take your own reference photos, like you pose yourself or you friends pose, stuff like that to get what you want. And so the woman in the red jacket is measuring the water depth in the salt marsh. And then the two women to the right are planting marsh grass, which is something that's happening a lot. And salt marshes along the East Coast is replanting them, especially with sea level rise, or just with infrastructure along the coast affecting them. These two figures are father and daughter, and I'll talk about those dashed lines near them when I zoom out on the painting in a moment. Oh, I meant to zoom in, but I didn't, so it's okay. And the other two figures. So I'm going to talk about the painting as a whole, but then I'm going to zoom in on a few specific areas to tell you about. And so basically, this painting is a set of two, which is called a diptych. So you can see the image continues kind of from one to the next. And so I have three different graphs in this painting, and they're the three graphs I showed you before. So at the bottom, the sea level rise graph is, again, that kind of greenish blue ocean with the fish. And that is showing sea level rise from 1950 to present. And then again, where the graph ends and it breaks away into the dashed lines, those dashed lines, somewhere within them is where the amount of sea level will rise through 2050. So that's kind of, is going to be somewhere within that is what is believed. And so I didn't want to kind of color in the ocean there because I think that made it look more overwhelming. And it is a lot, but it's a scale here, like it's a matter of inches, whereas this graph looks like it would, overtop the people, and I didn't want that visual. And then the two other graphs are kind of on the right-hand painting, but kind of towards the left side where those two people are in the background, if you can see them. And so that lighter green graph is the one about the percentage of US adults who are, vote for environmental protection policies. And then underneath their feet in yellow along the grass is the graph that's about the National Wildlife Refuge land that's being set aside along the Gulf of Maine. And so these paintings for me were a lot more detailed, and I had a hard time figuring out how do I best tell this story about changes along the Gulf of Maine to marshes, but also, actions that people are taking in communities to address these changes. And so I'm happy with what I came up with, but I want to keep pushing that and do more work. A lot of I kind of showed you a smattering of work from over my career, but a lot of my recent work has really been trying to focus a lot more on including messages of hope and action, because I think those are really important for people to see and know. And those stories there's so many of them, but I don't think that they're really covered in the same way in the news. And I think for me, what gives me hope around climate change is paying attention to what's happening locally. I know that would depend on what, part of the country you live in, but what is happening locally that's good, what environmental progress is happening. Because sometimes if you look at a really big scale, you might not feel that hope. Those are the three graphs all together that I'd included. And so again, I think by themselves, these are so important. I think that they tell really strong stories, but it's such a different visual than the way that I included them in my painting. And then I'm just going to go back to the slide that I'd had out of place. I don't know how that happened because it shows these paintings on display. And so these are the first paintings that I've had in a museum show, which is really exciting for me. It's very recent, and so they're currently hanging at the Peabody Essex Museum, which is in Salem, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. So really not too far from Wells, and so. They are part of a group show called Climate Action Inspiring Change that's there. And it is a really inspiring show. It's a lot of different artists, about 28, and the artwork is really different and are really different styles. And it's all kind of about things that are happening and things that we can learn about around climate change. And the show is going to be up for a long time through July of 2023. So still over a year from now. And not only is there this exhibit, but most of the exhibits at Peabody Essex right now are around environmental topics. So sorry about that being out of order. I'm just scrolling back to where it was. So my final takeaways that I wanted to communicate with you all is that I think that art is one really good way to connect with people about important topics. That's something that I began to see, like in college, taking art history courses. That's something that we've always done, is used art to express what's, the human experience, like what's happening, what do we feel. And I think it's really good at that. And people are very receptive to emotion in art. Second, I think that with creativity, data can tell a more personal story. So I'm not saying that data doesn't have creativity already, it does, but I think it's not always making that connection with people who are outside of that specific, research field, or didn't have to kind of use and make data in college or their career. And so I think that that what the student art is showing me is that they can connect to these topics and this data. They just need to kind of dig in a little deeper to do so. And then third, my primary goal with my art is basically to keep these things as part of a conversation about climate change. I know that I bring up things about climate change a lot to people in discussions, and I have a lot of thoughts around it. And in my opinion, that doesn't have to go in an overwhelming direction all the time. It can sometimes, but I think it can also be in a positive light. You can be talking about, again, like in Maine, I liked looking at the kind of climate action reports for the state and what, like Portland was planning to do, what their plans are. And most states have those regardless of like the part of the country they are in. And so it's that kind of thing that I like to like look into, and then I can tell other people about that. Or when I observe like the weather where I live and I'm like, oh, this is not my norm. Like, have you noticed this? And I try to bring that like to the forefront just a little bit more with people and push them on it, because then they're thinking about it and that can be really reflected in their actions. Thank you very much for listening to me talk so much about the work that I do. There's so much great art about the environment now, which is really exciting for me. And I appreciate you all coming and listening. I look forward to talking with you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Jill. That was amazing. This is the time in the program where folks can ask Jill questions if you have them, and you can raise your hand or unmute yourself, whichever you choose, or type it in the chat. Go ahead, Lori.
Jill, I have a question. I'm dying to ask you, do you know who Edward Tufte is?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't,
So,
I don't think I did before. I'm trying to remember because it was, 7 or 8 years ago when I started the style. I don't remember if I'd come across his work before I started this or if I've seen it since. Like, I know now I have,
right.
I might have, and it might have like kind of stuck in my brain, but not,
Right.
Yeah.
So for anyone else on the call that doesn't know him, he's done exactly what Jill is doing, and he's given seminars on it. He's more about the data than the art, and he's not generating the art like she is. But he's all about finding examples of a better way to explain data or information to people in a way that they can digest it just by visualizing it, just by seeing it. And one of the best examples is a map, and this is a map not that he generated again, but that a French engineer generated 100 years ago about Napoleon's march into Russia. And the way he depicted that was a thick line at the start of the march, to show how many men Napoleon had. And that line got narrower and narrower as they traveled into Russia. So it was also a map as well as a numerical depiction. And then, of course, that line narrowing and narrowing showed the defeat or the outcome, the poor outcome for Napoleon of that campaign. So it's exactly about what you're doing, Jill, which is a better way to visualize data in a way that's more digestible for people. So my other question for you is, what's next for you? Because what he does is, he does some, seminars or did, he probably doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
But how else can you disseminate this kind of information to people? Like, where else could you go? Have you thought about writing books? Have you thought about giving more seminars? Have you thought about doing murals to get, this kind of information out there to more people? Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of different ideas, and I think I'm doing art full time now, and so a lot of times it's like I'm working on ideas and I'm putting them out there in the world. I'm applying for things, and then you also have a lot of things that come back to you that you don't expect and you wouldn't have found, so it's like that give and take. And so like I want to always be like also kind of a fine artist, and just in the sense of like I'm creating paintings I can show in galleries and museums, and then I sell a lot of prints of my work, but there's like, that science communication side that I always want to do as well. That's, doing education and doing outreach. So I do give quite a few different types of talks, and like, sometimes it's like, conservation groups or organizations, or sometimes it's like at colleges or in like community spaces, or like I gave one recently at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And so it's stuff like that. But I think the most fun for me has been like the work with the students. And I think like teaching is really hard, but when you get to go in and just like be with the kids for like a few days or something, it's a lot different, it's like you're the exciting visitor to them. And so it's really rewarding, and I get to like learn a lot from them. And so I just applied for a big grant to do that on a larger scale. So who knows, but that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to grow from, like a piecemeal thing to like a more cohesive kind of continuous thing.
Yes.
Kind of working as a studio artist, but then always having that side. So I don't know, as there's a lot of ways I think I could go with it, and I'm still figuring that out myself.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions out there for Jill?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Hi. I'm sorry I missed most of your seminar, Jill. I discovered you through the Banff Film Festival a number of years ago at Freiburg Academy, small film that was featured that year. And I've kind of been following your work for quite some time. I'm just wondering, like, what kind of future climate change, particular areas or climate stresses you might be focusing your future work on. Like thinking in Maine, it's water insecurity is probably, I don't know if you've heard very much about the water issues in the state of Maine in this area.
I don't know as much about that. I mean, I know it's a thing, but I don't know like details about it. But I think actually, so I was living, I mentioned this at the beginning, but like I was living in Maine for over a decade, but I actually just recently moved to Washington State because of a position that my longtime partner got. And so I've been making a lot of paintings about Maine, also like about a lot of other places during that time period. But I really want to make some collaborations here now. And so especially something about the Pacific Northwest is climate change is definitely, I felt like it was in my face in Maine, but I feel like it's even more in your face here in terms of like, fire, smoke, and the severity of drought and heat waves and things like that. And so I think that's going to be really impactful for me to try to touch on. But one thing I really want to do, and this could be anywhere, is like work with environmental nonprofit groups to make art about the kind of things that they're doing in communities, to show more of like that side of the action. Because I think, well, I'm always going to show the data of what's happening. I want more of that too, and for people to learn about, I guess that realm. So that's kind of a big goal for me to start doing in the next year.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of material.
Yeah, there's always so many ideas. Too
Well, thank you. I love your work.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am Heidi Baker. Maybe I can get on my video so you can see me a little bit better. But I work for a land trust, Maine Coast Heritage Trust here in Maine. And so I was, just curious on all pieces. And right now we're working on a visitor center and trying to, evaluate how do we connect with people quickly in situations like that, so that, you know, if they're only seeing a visual while they're walking through, that it really like connects with them quickly. And I, you know, Jill, I just think about your work and how amazing, you know, like we're, especially with nonprofits, like we have data nonstop on how, you know, like how we are doing things, how we're managing things, and that's how we kind of tell our story. And it's, yeah, I loved how you were saying that data is creative, and I think that's great. Lots of times I think it's really boring and it's hard to like tell that story well. So I would love to connect with you and thinking about ways to, you know, do your artwork in like visitor center sections, because I think that would be an amazing way for people to connect with the coast of Maine and what we're, you know, what we're doing in a visual way. So thank you so
Awesome.
much. I have a lot
Yeah,
of
please do.
brain waves happening right now.
Great. I'll put my email in the chat for anyone that is interested.
That'd be great.
Hey Jill, I have a question about like the process with the students. I feel like it feels daunting. Like I feel like you know, you already are a climate scientist, so you understand the data, you've been in the field, like you have just a strong foundation to start with. And then you're kind of starting from somewhat of scratch with these different pieces that they're interested in researching. So I'm just curious how long is the process? What are some like steps that you ask them to do beforehand? And what are the challenges? I feel like it must take different students different amounts of time, and then adding the hope piece too, especially for elementary or middle school, into their art that they're doing.
Yeah, I'm honestly still learning a lot about it, because at the beginning, even though I kind of designed this kind of lesson plan around my art, it was still like, and a lot of times still like I'll present to the students and like share my work and share what the project is going to be and like do a how-to with them. But the teachers are the ones doing most of the work a lot of the time, and like helping them find like that data, like find the data. And obviously if it's like, if they're high schoolers or something, they can do a lot of their own research, but if not, you know, they really need a lot of guidance with that. And so when I worked with, I showed photos of a school I worked with in Colorado recently. I was there for more of it. The project was over 2 weeks, but it was kind of intensive even to do over 2 weeks. I think that a lot of times schools do it over like a couple months, because then they're working on it. Like sometimes it's been with an art teacher, and sometimes it's been with a science teacher, and sometimes it's been like, you know, both, or like a few classes. And so they have more than one period during a day to work on parts of it. But a lot of times it's obviously just a part of their day, and so it's over a longer, like a few weeks at least. But yeah, so I'm still learning about that, especially because I don't have like a formal teaching background, and so I'm learning a lot of those kind of skills as I go from trying and from the teachers. Yeah, but it's a lot of like them like working with me on that, and so that's been really awesome. So oh, and with the hope and action piece, yeah, it's like I'm trying to make sure I talk to them about that and like show them specific examples and bring that up to the teachers and things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also I appreciate your work. I mean, it's
Thank
so
you.
significant, especially right now, just being able to bring meaning to people with what's going on out there that they might not be able to see or fully understand because they didn't collect it. So I think, yeah, it's so significant.
Thank you.
Clayton, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, Jill, with your relocation to the Pacific Northwest, which happens to be a phenomenal place, I miss it. Have you considered maybe kind of virtual workshops back with organizations back here in Maine to do something? I mean, you mentioned working with like science teachers and somebody with an art, and maybe organizations like, the one person from Maine Coast Heritage Trust or even Land Trust, the Wells Reserve. Have you considered maybe, unless you're willing to, to kind of travel back, but that adds more to the workshop, but maybe doing something virtually with a collaboration back here in Maine?
Yeah, and that's something I've done a little bit. So what I've done so far, I guess, is I did a workshop that was for teachers so that they could kind of pilot the project. Like I kind of taught them how to do it, and then they had to do it. It was like a 3-hour window, and then they had to work on them themselves because they were able to see like, oh, this is what it's like for the students. Like this is what it will take, what I'll need to be prepared for. And so it was something through Maine's Department of Education, and then it was with it was like Friends of Maine, coastal island refuges. And so I've done a couple, and that was just to say like I'm interested in that, and I've started to go into that realm, and so I would be interested in more. And so that one again was for teachers. So I don't know who else that would be helpful for in doing the workshop, because it was kind of to give them the skills to do that with their students. But I would be open for it depending on the like audiences that might be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Amanda, do you have a question? Oh, looks like you're muted.
Would you be interested in like ever coming back to like Portland to do a seminar?
Coming to Portland to do a seminar, is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was living in that area for a while. I really love it. So I think that I'm always, interested in doing something like that, like, especially if it could, provide me an opportunity to visit and work and like talk with people there. I think that would be wonderful. Especially if it was like next year, because then it would be like, oh, you get to go back and interact and be in that place that I really love. Thank you.
All right, well, it looks like we're at 7 o'clock. I think if there's one last burning question, and otherwise, I know Jill has her email in the chat, so
I have a quick question.
yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Can I sneak in too, just real quick? I just wondered, have you noticed any discrepancy in terms of engagement, either between genders or ages? Like, just curious. I'm a science teacher, high school science teacher. I was just wondering if you noticed anything significantly different between maybe your middle school experience. I know it's been short, but it's good that you're thinking.
Yeah, good question. Because I guess like I'm not always maybe with the classes for long enough time physically to know, but like with the middle school I worked with recently for a week, I feel like it was maybe like a little bit for the guys, like to not want to seem like they cared, even if they did.
Okay.
But for high school, I feel like it's a little bit more like everyone starts to be that way, where it's hard to tell if they care sometimes. So, but not always. I mean, there's a lot of high schoolers that aren't like that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I'm not quite sure in terms of like, so yeah, for age, I feel like the elementary school, especially like the older ones who can understand it better, really excited about it. And then middle school, they usually are too. But for gender, I'm not sure as much, except for what I noted. But I'm sure there are those things that I just haven't picked up on yet,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but.
And my second question, I didn't see, do you display the actual data, the graphs next to your work? Like say at the Peabody Museum, do you have the graphs that inspired your marsh paintings?
Not the graphs themselves. I have in the captions, I say what the graphs and the data are. And then on my website, I have links to the graph so that people can go see, just look at the graph themselves. But I do like that idea. And for students, they have done that sometimes, is like have them side by side. And I think that can be really useful for them and for like people who come to see their work, just to really see what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet displaying them together, the data, and then the data embedded in the art helps with the aha moment. And maybe
Right.
building on what you were asking about, Lisa, maybe for different age groups a little bit more easily than others.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I hadn't, like, even though I've seen them do that, I hadn't really kind of framed it as, or like thought about it more. And so I think that would be good to mention when I do this with schools. Good idea.
Well, my colleague Barbara Reed is here, and I know that was inspired to do a lesson plan with her environmental AP class.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I don't know if she's shy, but thank you very much for, it's really amazing work and so enlightening and inspiring.
Thank you so
very
much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.